The applause finally faded, but the energy in the room hadn't. People were talking excitedly, their previous boredom and disappointment completely forgotten. They'd come expecting one kind of performance and gotten something entirely different. Something better, some of them were saying. Something they'd never forget. Rosa stood on the stage, still trying to process what had just happened. Her legs felt weak. Her hands trembled with leftover adrenaline. She'd done it. Actually done it. And not only had she not failed, she'd somehow managed to move a room full of people who'd been ready to see her fail. Mr. Winterfield stepped up to the microphone again. "Ladies and gentlemen, I think we can all agree that this evening has taken an unexpected turn." Laughter rippled through the crowd, but it was warm now, not cruel. "I want to thank Rosa for her incredible performance. I also want to apologize to her publicly for not recognizing her talent sooner." He turned to Rosa, his expression serious. "You've worked in this house for 3 years. 3 years, and I never once asked you about yourself. Never wondered who you were beyond the work you did for us. That's my failure, not yours. And I'm sorry." The apology hung in the air. Rosa wasn't sure what to do with it. She appreciated the words, but part of her wondered if he would have said them if she'd played badly. If she'd stumbled through a simple piece and confirmed all their assumptions. Would he be apologizing then, or would he have let the mockery stand? But she pushed that thought aside. This moment was too important to poison with cynicism. "Thank you, sir," Rosa said quietly. Then, because she felt like honesty was required now, she added, "I never told you. I didn't think it mattered." "It matters," Mr. Winterfield said firmly. "It absolutely matters." Mrs. Winterfield dabbed at her eyes with a handkerchief that probably cost more than Rosa's weekly salary. "My dear, you must tell us, where did you learn to play like that?" Rosa took a breath. She'd kept her story private for so long, tucked away in the quiet spaces of her heart, but maybe it was time to share it. These people had seen her play. Maybe now they could see her too. "My grandmother," Rosa said. "She was a concert pianist in the Philippines before the war. She lost everything but not the music. She taught me from the time I was 5 years old. Every day for hours until my fingers ached and my back hurt. She was strict, but she loved music more than anything. And she taught me to love it too." The room had gone quiet again, everyone listening. Rosa continued, her voice growing stronger. "I wanted to be a professional musician. I had scholarships offered, opportunities, but then my father got sick. My family needed money, not dreams. So I did what I had to do. I came here to work, and I've been sending money home ever since. But you kept playing," Isabella said softly. "You didn't give up." Rosa shook her head. "I couldn't give up. Music isn't something I do. It's something I am. So I'd play late at night when everyone was asleep. Just me and the piano in the conservatory, with the moon coming through the windows. Those were my hours, the only time I felt like myself." Several people in the audience looked ashamed now. The man who'd pointed at her was staring at his shoes. The influencer had put her phone away entirely, her earlier enthusiasm for content apparently gone. "How many others, I wonder?" Mr. Winterfield said, speaking more to himself than to anyone else. "How many people do we pass every day without seeing them? How many stories do we miss because we've already decided who someone is based on what they wear or what they do?" It was a good question, one that hung heavy in the fancy ballroom with its crystal chandeliers and expensive wine. A woman Rosa didn't recognize stood up from her seat. She was older, maybe in her 60s, with gray hair swept up in an elegant style. "Excuse me," she said, her voice carrying authority. "I'm Rebecca Chen. I'm the director of the Metropolitan Conservatory." Rosa's heart skipped. She knew that name. The Metropolitan Conservatory was one of the most prestigious music schools in the country. Rebecca Chen walked to the front of the room, looking directly at Rosa. "That performance was extraordinary. I've heard professionals who couldn't play Rachmaninoff with that level of technical skill and emotional depth. Who trained you besides your grandmother?" "Just her," Rosa admitted. "And myself. Books, recordings, whatever I could find. But mostly just practice. Hours and hours of practice." Rebecca Chen nodded slowly. "That's remarkable. Raw talent combined with dedication is rare. Having both in someone who hasn't had formal training beyond childhood is almost unheard of." She paused. "Have you ever considered returning to formal music education?" Rosa wanted to laugh. "Considered it?" She dreamed about it. But dreams didn't pay for her father's medication or her daughter's school fees or rent on the small apartment that housed her entire family. I've considered it, Rosa said carefully, but it's not possible. I have responsibilities, people depending on me. What if those obstacles could be addressed? Rebecca Chen asked. What if there was a scholarship? A full scholarship covering tuition, housing, even a stipend for living expenses? The room seemed to tilt. Rosa gripped the edge of the piano to steady herself. A scholarship? The conservatory has a special program for exceptional talents who face financial barriers, Rebecca explained. It's rare that we offer it, but what I heard tonight was rare. You have a gift, Rosa, a real gift. It would be a crime to let it waste away in midnight practice sessions. Rosa couldn't form words. Her mind was racing too fast. A scholarship? To actually study music again? To have teachers and resources and time to do nothing but play? But then reality crashed back in. My family, she said. I can't just stop working. They need the money I send home. Mr. Winterfield cleared his throat. What if they didn't? What if there was a fund established to support your family while you study? Consider it. Compensation for the 3 years you've worked here without me recognizing your value as more than staff. Rosa stared at him. Was this real? Were these people actually offering her a way back to music, after she'd given up on that dream so completely that she barely let herself think about it? I have a daughter, Rosa said, her voice cracking. In Manila. She's 8 years old. I haven't seen her in person in almost a year. Isabella's face softened. You could bring her here. There are good schools nearby. You could actually be with her while you study. The tears came then, hot and fast. Rosa had spent 3 years being strong, holding everything together, never letting anyone see her break. But this kindness after cruelty, this possibility after resignation, it broke something open inside her. I don't know what to say, she whispered. Say yes, Isabella urged. Say you'll do it. Say you'll stop hiding your light and let it shine. Rosa looked out at the audience, at all these people who'd dismissed her hours earlier. Some of them still looked uncomfortable, wrestling with their own prejudices, but others looked genuine in their support, like they truly wanted to see her succeed now that they'd been forced to acknowledge her as a person. She thought about her grandmother, who'd played music even when she had nothing else, who'd insisted that talent was a responsibility, not just a gift. If you have something beautiful to share with the world, she used to say, you have an obligation to share it. Rosa had been sharing it with empty rooms and moonlight. Maybe it was time to share it with more. Yes, she said, her voice barely audible. Then louder. Yes, I'll do it. The applause started again, not as thunderous as before, but warmer somehow. More personal. Rebecca Chen pulled out a business card and handed it to Rosa. Call me Monday. We'll set everything up. I want you to start next semester if possible. Mr. Winterfield stepped forward. And I'll arrange the family support fund immediately. You'll have a contract by the end of the week, guaranteeing financial support for your family for the next 4 years. That should cover a bachelor's degree at least. 4 years. Rosa felt dizzy. But that's what it takes, he said simply. Consider it an investment. Though honestly, after tonight, I think I'm the one getting the better end of this deal. Your performance just saved the gala's reputation. Mrs. Winterfield surprised everyone by giving Rosa a genuine hug. You'll need new clothes. Performance clothes. Let me help with that, please. I'd like to do something useful. Isabella was crying again, happy tears this time. She grabbed Rosa's hand and squeezed it tight. You're going to be amazing. Everyone's going to know your name. The party continued after that, but it had transformed completely. People weren't just staying out of obligation anymore. They wanted to be part of this story, this moment when the impossible became possible. They lined up to congratulate Rosa, to tell her how moved they'd been by her performance. Some of the apologies felt hollow. The influencer, in particular, seemed more interested in getting a photo with Rosa than in actual remorse. But Rosa accepted it all with grace. She'd learned over the years that you couldn't control how people felt. You could only control how you responded. The man who'd pointed at her earlier approached with his wife. He looked genuinely ashamed. I'm sorry, he said bluntly. What I did was cruel and stupid. I judged you without knowing anything about you. That's inexcusable. Rosa appreciated that more than the flowery apologies others had offered. At least it was honest. "Thank you," she said. "I accept your apology." As the evening wound down and guests finally began to leave, the atmosphere had changed entirely. What started as a disaster had become something magical. People would talk about this night, but not for the reasons they'd expected. They'd talk about the maid who played piano like an angel, about the reminder that talent and worth don't wear uniforms. Rosa found a quiet moment to call her mother in Manila. It was early morning there, and her mother answered on the second ring. "Rosa, is everything okay? You never call during work." "Mama," Rosa said, and then she couldn't hold back anymore. The whole story poured out. The mockery, the performance, the scholarship, everything. Her mother listened in stunned silence. "And I can bring Elena here," Rosa finished, wiping her eyes. "I can actually be with my daughter while I study. We can be a family again." Her mother was crying now too. Rosa could hear it in her voice. "Your grandmother would be so proud. She always knew you were meant for this." "I never forgot what she taught me," Rosa said softly. "Not a single lesson." "She's watching," her mother said with certainty. "And she's smiling." After the call, Rosa sat alone in the ballroom for a few minutes. The staff had already begun cleanup, though they kept giving her curious looks. She was still in her uniform, still technically working, but everything felt different now. Isabella found her there. "You okay?" Rosa nodded. "I think so. It's just a lot to take in." "You changed things tonight," Isabella said. "Not just for yourself. You changed how people think, how they see. That's bigger than music, Rosa. That's important." "I just played piano," Rosa said with a small smile. "You did more than that. You showed them their own blindness. Some of them won't change, people rarely do. But some of them will. They'll think twice before judging someone. They'll look a little deeper. That's because of you." Rosa thought about that. She hadn't set out to teach anyone a lesson. She just wanted to survive the moment. But maybe that's how change happened. Not through grand gestures, but through small, honest moments when people were forced to confront their own assumptions. 3 weeks later, Rosa gave her notice at the Winterfield estate. Mr. Winterfield asked her to stay on as a guest, living in the house while she prepared for the conservatory. She accepted, grateful for the kindness but aware that their relationship had fundamentally shifted. She wasn't staff anymore. She was something else, something in between. Maybe that's what growth looked like, living in the space between what you were and what you were becoming. 6 months after that night, Rosa performed her first official recital at a small concert hall. Her mother flew in from Manila, bringing Elena with her. Rosa saw her daughter in the audience and almost couldn't play through the tears. Almost. But she made it through, and when it was over, she didn't go back to any kind of old life. She went forward into something new. The video of her Winterfield estate performance did go viral, just as she'd feared, but not in the way she'd expected. People shared it not as a joke, but as inspiration. The caption that went viral wasn't mocking, it was, "Never judge someone by their uniform." It became a moment, a cultural reference point, a reminder that was needed. Rosa never forgot that night. The cruelty and the kindness, the fear and the triumph. She thought about it every time she sat at a piano, every time she faced a skeptical audience, every time someone questioned whether she belonged. The thing was, she'd always belonged. At the piano, at the conservatory, on stage. The only thing that had changed was that other people finally saw it too. They'd needed her to prove it first to earn the right to be seen. That wasn't fair. That would never be fair, but she'd done it anyway. Not because she owed them anything, but because she owed her grandmother everything. Because she owed her daughter the example of a mother who didn't give up. Because she owed herself the chance to be who she'd always been underneath the uniform. A pianist. Not a maid who played piano, just a pianist, and that made all the difference. The first chord hung in the air like a question. Deep, rich, resonant, the kind of sound that made your chest vibrate if you were standing close enough. Rosa's hands moved to the second chord, then the third, building the foundation of one of the most beautiful pieces ever written. The shaking in her hands had stopped. That surprised her more than anything. The moment her fingers touched the keys, everything else fell away. The judgmental stares, the whispered doubts, the weight of expectation, all of it dissolved. There was only the music now, The opening of Rachmaninoff's Piano Concerto No. 2 starts slowly, mournfully almost, big heavy chords that feel like bells tolling. Rosa had always loved this part because it felt honest. It didn't try to impress you right away. It built slowly, letting you feel the sadness before it showed you the beauty. Her fingers found each note like they were meeting old friends. Years of playing in secret, of stealing moments at this very piano when the house slept, had prepared her for this. Muscle memory took over where confidence faltered. Her hands knew what to do even when her mind was screaming that this was impossible. In the audience, the skeptical expressions were beginning to shift. People who'd been ready to laugh stopped mid-smirk. The man who'd pointed at her earlier leaned forward in his seat, his eyebrows drawing together in confusion. This wasn't what he'd expected. Rosa moved into the main melody and her right hand danced across the higher keys while her left maintained the steady, powerful bass line. This was where the piece started to reveal itself, where the sadness transformed into something more complex, hope mixed with longing, beauty emerging from sorrow. She thought about her grandmother as she played, how the old woman's hands had moved across their broken piano, creating magic despite missing keys, despite the out-of-tune strings, despite everything. "Don't just play the notes," her grandmother would say. "Tell the story. Every piece is a story. Your job is to make people feel it." Rosa was making them feel it. She could sense it in the way the room had gone completely still. No one was whispering anymore. No one was checking their phones. Even the influencer's recording hand had lowered slightly, as if she'd forgotten she was supposed to be documenting this for social media. The music built and built. Rosa's hands flew across the keys, hitting runs of notes so fast they blurred together, yet each one clear and precise. This was the part that separated good pianists from great ones, the technical skill required to maintain clarity while playing at incredible speed. But Rosa didn't think about technique. She never had. When she played, she thought about stories. Right now, she was telling her own story. Every note was a memory. The joy of her daughter's birth, the pain of leaving Manila, the exhaustion of working long days, the small victories, like finally sending enough money home for her father's surgery, the loneliness of being far from everyone she loved. It all poured into the music. The piano became her voice, speaking things she'd never been able to say out loud. Mrs. Winterfield had her hand over her mouth. Her eyes were wide, glittering with what might have been tears. Mr. Winterfield stood frozen, his previous skepticism replaced by something like awe. Isabella was crying openly, smiling through her tears, looking at Rosa like she was seeing her for the first time. The piece moved into a quieter section, intimate and tender. Rosa's hands softened, coaxing gentle sounds from the keys. This part always reminded her of lullabies, of the songs her mother used to sing. She played it like a prayer, like a love letter to everyone she'd left behind. The man in the gray suit who'd fumbled through Mozart earlier had tears running down his cheeks. He didn't bother to wipe them away. The woman who'd played for Elise sat with her hands clasped so tightly her knuckles were white. Even the influencer had stopped recording and was just listening. Actually listening, maybe for the first time all night. Rosa transitioned into a more playful section, her hands crossing over each other, creating a conversation between the high notes and the low ones. This was the part her grandmother had loved most. "Listen to them talk to each other," she'd say. The right hand is asking questions and the left hand is answering. The ballroom's acoustics were perfect. Every note resonated, filled the space, wrapped around the audience like a physical presence. Rosa had never played in a room like this before. In her grandmother's house, the sound had been swallowed by old furniture and thin walls. In the empty conservatory at night, the sound had echoed off hard surfaces. But here, with people filling the space with the high ceiling and careful architecture, the music sounded alive. She moved into the climax of the piece, the part that always made her heart race. The tempo increased. The dynamics grew, loud and soft, fast and slow, all woven together in a pattern that felt like joy and pain and everything in between. Her hands moved independently, each doing something completely different, yet together creating harmony. This was what her grandmother had meant about music being fair. In this moment, Rosa wasn't a maid. She wasn't an immigrant or a mother separated from her child or someone who cleaned toilets and scrubbed floors. She was a pianist. Just a pianist, and the music didn't care about anything else. Sweat beaded on her forehead. Her arms ached from the intensity of the playing. But she didn't slow down. Couldn't slow down. The music had its own momentum now, carrying her forward like a wave. She glanced up for just a second and caught sight of the audience. People were leaning forward in their seats, completely absorbed. The cruelty from earlier had vanished from their faces. They looked transported, lost in the music the way she was lost in it. The piece began to wind down, moving back to those big, heavy chords from the beginning. But this time they sounded different. Not sad anymore, resolved. Like a question finally being answered. Like a story reaching its natural conclusion. Rosa's hands slowed, drawing out the final notes. She let each one ring fully before moving to the next, savoring them. These last few measures felt sacred somehow. Everything she'd been holding inside for 3 years, all the homesickness and frustration and fear and hope, it was all in these final notes. She played the last chord and held it, her foot on the sustain pedal, letting the sound fill every corner of the room. The vibration traveled up through her hands, through her arms, settling somewhere deep in her chest. Then, slowly, she lifted her hands from the keys. The sound faded gradually, reluctantly, until silence reclaimed the room. Rosa sat perfectly still, her hands in her lap, hardly daring to breathe. For a moment, nothing happened. The silence stretched on and on. Rosa's heart sank. She'd poured everything into that performance, and now the silence felt like judgment. They'd hated it. Then Mr. Winterfield stood up, just stood up, his chair scraping against the floor, and he started clapping, not polite applause, not the restrained golf claps she'd heard earlier. Real applause, his hands coming together hard and fast, the sound sharp and clear. Isabella jumped to her feet beside him, clapping so hard her hands must have hurt. Tears streamed down her face, but she was smiling wider than Rosa had ever seen. Then, like a wave, everyone else rose. The man who'd mocked her, the woman who'd laughed, the influencer who'd recorded her humiliation. One by one, then in groups, then all together, they stood. And they clapped. The sound was deafening. It rolled over Rosa like thunder, washing away every cruel word, every dismissive glance, every moment she'd felt invisible. This sound said she was seen, really truly seen. Some people were wiping their eyes. Others were shaking their heads in disbelief as if they couldn't quite process what they'd just witnessed. The woman who'd played for Elise earlier was sobbing outright, her husband's arm around her shoulders. The applause continued. It didn't fade like normal applause does after a few seconds. It grew stronger, more insistent. People were shouting, "Brava!" Some were whistling. The sound filled the ballroom the way the music had filled it moments before. Rosa stood on shaking legs, overwhelmed. She didn't know what to do with her hands, where to look, how to accept this. She'd never been applauded before, never been acknowledged like this. Her body didn't have muscle memory for success, only for making herself small. But she forced herself to stand tall, forced herself to face the audience who had mocked her, and now celebrated her. She nodded. A small gesture of acknowledgement, and the applause somehow grew even louder. Mr. Winterfield was climbing onto the stage, and for a terrifying second, Rosa thought he was angry. But when he reached her, his eyes were bright with emotion she couldn't quite name. Respect, maybe, or something close to it. "Rosa," he said, and he had to raise his voice to be heard over the continuing applause. "I owe you an apology. We all do." Rosa didn't know what to say to that, so she said nothing. Just stood there while the applause finally began to fade, while people remained on their feet, while the whole evening rearranged itself around this new reality. That was... Mr. Winterfield paused, searching for words. That was the finest performance this estate has ever hosted. And I mean that sincerely. Mrs. Winterfield had joined them on stage, her perfectly composed expression cracked wide open by genuine emotion. "Rosa, my dear, I had no idea. We had no idea," she laughed, and it sounded almost hysterical. "Here we were trying to find a pianist, and you were here all along." Isabella pushed past her parents and hugged Rosa tightly. "I told you," she whispered in Rosa's ear. "I told you that you could do this." Rosa hugged her back, finally letting herself cry. All the fear, all the stress, all the years of holding everything together, it poured out now, messy and real and human. When they pulled apart, Rosa saw that the entire audience was still watching. But they weren't looking at the maid anymore. They were looking at the pianist. And maybe, just maybe, They were beginning to understand that those two things had always been the same person. They just hadn't been willing to see it until now. The ballroom fell silent so quickly that Rosa could hear her own heartbeat. Every conversation stopped mid-sentence. Every head turned toward Isabella, who stood in the center of the room like she'd just dropped a bomb. Rosa's hands trembled so badly that the tray she was holding rattled. She wanted to disappear, to melt into the walls, to be anywhere but here. This couldn't be happening. Isabella couldn't have just said what Rosa thought she said, but Isabella wasn't backing down. She stood tall, her chin up, staring down the crowd of guests who looked at her with a mixture of surprise and confusion. Rosa had always known Isabella was different from her parents, kinder, more aware of the world beyond her privilege. But she'd never seen this side of her, fierce and protective and unafraid. "Isabella," Mrs. Winterfield said carefully, stepping down from the stage. Her voice carried a warning. The kind mothers give their children when they're about to embarrass the family. "Perhaps we should discuss this privately." "No." Isabella's voice didn't waver. "Everyone here just spent the last 10 minutes mocking Rosa, treating her like she's less than human. The least I can do is tell the truth. She plays piano. Beautifully." The influencer in the red dress laughed, but it sounded nervous now. "Oh, come on. You're not seriously suggesting—" "I'm not suggesting anything," Isabella cut her off. "I'm stating a fact. I've heard Rosa play. Multiple times. I've heard her play pieces that most of the people in this room couldn't even name, let alone perform." Mr. Winterfield had joined his wife, and they were both staring at their daughter like she'd grown a second head. He cleared his throat. "Isabella, I'm sure you mean well, but..." "But what, Dad?" "But she's the maid, so she couldn't possibly be talented. But we can't let her embarrass herself in front of our friends." Isabella's words had an edge to them that Rosa had never heard before. "Or are you worried she'll embarrass us?" The question hung in the air like smoke. Mr. Winterfield's face flushed red. Several guests shifted uncomfortably, suddenly very interested in their shoes or their drinks or anything that wasn't the scene unfolding in front of them. Rosa still stood frozen in the doorway to the kitchen. She couldn't move forward or backward. Her throat felt tight, like all the air had been sucked out of the room. Isabella was defending her, standing up for her in front of all these people, and Rosa didn't know whether to feel grateful or mortified or both. "Is this true?" Mr. Winterfield asked, turning to look at Rosa directly for what felt like the first time all evening. "Do you play piano?" Every eye in the room swiveled to her. The silence was suffocating. Rosa's mouth went dry. She could lie, shake her head, end this horrible moment and retreat back to the safety of being invisible. That would be easier. That would be safer. But something in Isabella's eyes stopped her. There was hope there, and trust and a belief that Rosa deserved better than what she'd been given. How could she disappoint that? "Yes, sir," Rosa heard herself say. Her voice came out quieter than she'd intended, barely above a whisper. "I can play." The murmurs started immediately. People turning to each other, eyebrows raised, skeptical expressions on their faces. The man who'd pointed at her earlier scoffed outright. "This is absurd. You can't seriously be considering this." "Why not?" Isabella shot back. "We've already had 3 volunteers who could barely play. What do we have to lose?" "Our dignity," the man's wife muttered, just loud enough to be heard. Mrs. Winterfield placed a hand on her husband's arm. Rosa could see the conflict on his face. On one hand, he was desperate to save the evening. The gala was important to him, to their reputation, to the charity. On the other hand, asking the maid to perform, that would be talked about for months, maybe years, and not in a good way. But then he looked at the ballroom, at the half-empty seats, at the guests who were still filtering toward the exits. He was running out of options. Pride was expensive, and right now he couldn't afford it. "Rosa," he said slowly, as if testing the idea with each word, "if you can play, I would be grateful. If you would consider performing for us tonight." It wasn't warm. It wasn't even particularly kind. But it was permission. Rosa's legs felt like water. Her mind raced through 1,000 thoughts at once. She could do this. She knew she could. She'd played pieces far more complex than anything Victor Ashford would have performed tonight. Her grandmother had trained her well, pushed her hard, instilled in her a love of music that no amount of hardship had been able to kill. But these people didn't want her to succeed. They wanted her to fail. She could see it in their faces, in the way they watched her like she was a circus act. They wanted confirmation that she was exactly what they thought she was, just a maid who didn't belong anywhere near a concert piano. The influencer already had her phone out again, recording. This would go viral no matter what happened. If Rosa played badly, she'd be a joke. If she played well? Actually, Rosa wasn't sure what would happen if she played well. That scenario felt too unlikely to imagine. Rosa started, then stopped. The tray in her hands felt impossibly heavy. I'm not dressed for— The piano doesn't care what you're wearing, Isabella said firmly. She walked over to Rosa, took the tray from her hands and set it on a nearby table. Then she looked Rosa directly in the eyes. You can do this. I know you can. Rosa wanted to believe her. God, she wanted to believe her so badly. But doubt was a familiar companion, and it whispered in her ear now. Who did she think she was? These people had paid thousands of dollars to see a world-renowned pianist. What made her think she could fill those shoes? But then she thought about her daughter back in Manila. Her beautiful, brilliant girl who deserved every opportunity Rosa had never gotten. If Rosa walked away now, what lesson would that teach? That people like them should know their place? That they should make themselves small to make others comfortable? No, not tonight. Rosa took a deep breath and nodded. Okay, I'll play. The murmurs grew louder. Some people looked intrigued now, curious about what would happen. Others looked openly disdainful, already preparing their critiques. The influencer was practically bouncing with excitement. This was better content than she could have hoped for. Rosa walked toward the stage, and it felt like the longest walk of her life. Each step echoed in her head. Her uniform felt suddenly too tight, too obvious, too much like a sign that said, I don't belong here. Her hands, rough from years of cleaning, seemed wrong against the memory of smooth ivory keys. Mr. Winterfield stood aside as she approached, his expression unreadable. Mrs. Winterfield's lips were pressed into a thin line of disapproval. But Isabella followed Rosa to the stage, staying close, her presence a small comfort in the ocean of judgment. Rosa climbed the 3 steps to the stage area, and the piano loomed before her. It was beautiful, even more beautiful than she'd thought during those secret midnight sessions. Up here under the lights with everyone watching, it seemed to glow. Her hands shook as she approached it. She could hear people whispering, placing bets probably on how badly this would go. The man in the gray suit who'd played earlier looked smug, like he couldn't wait to see her fail worse than he had. Rosa sat on the bench, and it felt both foreign and familiar. She'd sat here before, but never like this. Never with lights on her. Never with an audience. She adjusted the bench slightly, buying herself a few seconds to breathe. What will you play? Mr. Winterfield asked from beside the stage. His tone suggested he expected something simple, something easy. Probably that same for Elise that the woman earlier had managed. Rosa looked at the keys. At her hands hovering above them. At the faces in the crowd, some curious, some cruel, some already bored. Then she looked at Isabella, who smiled at her with complete faith. Rosa made her decision. If she was going to do this, she wasn't going to play it safe. She wasn't going to confirm their low expectations. She was going to play the piece that had always meant the most to her, the one her grandmother had taught her when she was 12 years old, the one that had made her fall in love with piano all over again. Rachmaninoff, Rosa said clearly. Piano Concerto No. 2. The room erupted in shocked murmurs. Someone laughed outright. Rachmaninoff was notoriously difficult, a piece that challenged even professional pianists. For a maid to claim she could play it, that was either incredible courage or devastating delusion. That's quite ambitious, Mr. Winterfield said carefully. He looked at his wife, who shook her head in disbelief. Perhaps something simpler, Mrs. Winterfield suggested, her voice dripping with condescension. We wouldn't want you to struggle. But Isabella spoke up again. Let her play what she wants. Rosa appreciated that, but it didn't calm her nerves. Her heart hammered so hard she thought everyone could hear it. Her hands were still shaking. She took a deep breath, closed her eyes, and tried to transport herself back to her grandmother's house. She could almost smell the jasmine that grew outside the window. Could almost hear her grandmother's voice. Music doesn't come from your fingers, my dear. It comes from your soul. Let it speak. Rosa placed her fingers on the keys. The room fell silent, waiting. This was it. The moment that would define her, at least in these people's eyes. The moment where she would either vindicate Isabella's faith in her or confirm every prejudice this room held. The moment where she would either remain invisible or finally be seen. Her fingers trembled above the keys. In the audience, someone coughed. Someone else whispered something that was probably unkind. The influencer's phone camera lens caught the light, a red dot that meant she was recording. Rosa thought about running. Even now she could stand up, apologize, say she'd made a mistake, retreat back to the kitchen where she belonged. No one would stop her. They'd probably be relieved. But then she thought about her daughter's last video call when she'd asked, "Mama, when are you coming home?" And Rosa had said, "Soon, baby, soon," knowing it wouldn't be soon at all, knowing she'd miss another birthday, another school play, another precious moment she could never get back. She thought about her grandmother, who'd played piano for the sheer love of it even when she had nothing else, who taught Rosa that music was one of the few things in the world that was truly fair. It didn't care about your bank account or your address or the color of your skin. It only cared whether you could feel it. Rosa could feel it. Right now, despite the fear, despite the humiliation, despite everything, she could feel the music inside her, desperate to come out. She took one more breath, let it out slowly, and began to play. The first notes of Rachmaninoff's Piano Concerto No. 2 filled the ballroom, and in that instant, everything changed. The ballroom had transformed from elegant to chaotic in a matter of minutes. Mr. Winterfield stood on stage looking like a man who'd just watched his life's work crumble. His wife kept whispering urgently in his ear while Peter worked his phone frantically, calling everyone he could think of who might save the evening. Rosa watched from her spot against the wall as guests began gathering their things. Some were heading toward the exits already. Others clustered in small groups, their disappointment clear on their faces. 3 years of working at the estate had taught Rosa to read a room, and this room was screaming one thing: this party was over. Can you believe this? A woman near Rosa muttered to her companion, "I turned down dinner with the Hendersons for this." "At least the food was decent," her friend replied with a shrug. Mr. Winterfield held up his hands, trying to get everyone's attention again. "Please, ladies and gentlemen, if you could just bear with us for a moment. We're making some calls. Perhaps we can find another performer." But even he didn't sound convinced. Where were you going to find a concert pianist on a Saturday night with zero notice? Everyone worth booking was already booked, probably performing somewhere else right now. Peter was still on his phone, shaking his head after each call. Rosa could see the conversation from where she stood, the apologetic expression, the desperate pitch, and then the disappointing end to each attempt. No one was available. Of course they weren't. "This is ridiculous," a man in an expensive suit announced loudly enough for half the room to hear. "I donated $20,000 to this event. The least they could do is provide the entertainment they promised." His wife patted his arm. "Oh, Gerald, it's not their fault. It was an accident." "Still," Gerald huffed, loosening his bow tie. "Very unprofessional." Rosa wanted to point out that accidents, by definition, weren't anyone's fault, but she kept her mouth shut as always. Her opinion wasn't wanted here, wasn't even acknowledged as existing. Mrs. Winterfield stepped up to the microphone, her composure still mostly intact despite the circumstances. "While we're working on finding a solution, please feel free to enjoy the refreshments. The bar is open and there's plenty of food." It was a weak offering and everyone knew it. People hadn't come here for free food and wine. They'd come for the prestige of saying they'd seen Victor Ashford perform live in an intimate setting. They'd come for the bragging rights, the social media posts, the story they could tell at their next dinner party. A young woman in a red dress, Rosa recognized her from magazines. Some social media influencer with millions of followers was already recording a video on her phone. "So, this is what happens when you pay premium prices for events," she said into the camera with exaggerated disappointment. "The main act doesn't show up and you're stuck with, well, nothing." Her friend giggled beside her. "At least we got some good content out of it. Drama sells better than a boring piano recital anyway." Rosa felt her jaw tighten. She'd spent hours helping to prepare this evening. She'd polished those floors until her back ached. She'd arranged flowers, folded napkins, run back and forth between the kitchen and the ballroom 100 times. And now these people were treating it like a joke, like someone's misfortune was just entertainment for their social media feeds. Up on stage, Mr. Winterfield was having a quiet meltdown. His perfect composure had cracked, and Rosa could see the panic in his eyes. This was supposed to be the event of the season. Instead, it was turning into an embarrassing disaster that people would talk about for all the wrong reasons. What if someone here could play? One of the organizers suggested. Loud enough for people nearby to hear. Surely in a room full of accomplished people, someone must have piano skills. It was a desperate idea, but Mr. Winterfield seized it like a lifeline. He grabbed the microphone again. "Excuse me, everyone. I know this is unorthodox, but I have to ask, is there anyone here who plays piano? Anyone at all?" The question hung in the air. A few people looked around, but no one stepped forward. Finally, a middle-aged man in a gray suit raised his hand tentatively. "I took lessons as a child. I could probably manage something simple." It wasn't what anyone wanted to hear, but it was better than nothing. Mr. Winterfield's face brightened with forced enthusiasm. "Wonderful. Please come up." The man made his way to the stage, looking increasingly uncomfortable as all eyes turned to him. He sat at the piano, cracked his knuckles nervously, and placed his hands on the keys. What came out was a halting, mistake-filled version of what might have been a Mozart sonata. He made it through about 30 seconds before stopping, his face red. "I'm sorry. I really don't remember much. It's been 30 years. Polite applause followed as he retreated back to his seat, looking like he wished the floor would swallow him whole. "Anyone else?" Mr. Winterfield asked, his desperation now fully visible. A woman volunteered next. She managed a passable rendition of Für Elise, the kind of thing every beginner learns. It was fine, technically correct, but it had all the emotional depth of elevator music. When she finished, the applause was even more polite, which was another way of saying it was barely there at all. Then a younger man tried, producing something that might have been jazz if you were being very generous. He played with more confidence than skill, hitting wrong notes but powering through like he hoped no one would notice. Everyone noticed. The whole thing was becoming uncomfortable to watch. These were people who were used to success, used to being good at things. Having them fumble through piano pieces in front of their peers was like watching a slow-motion car crash. Rosa had moved closer to the stage area now, collecting dessert plates that guests had abandoned on tables. The tiny chocolate cakes and fruit tarts sat half-eaten, forgotten in the chaos of the evening. She worked quietly, efficiently, trying to stay out of the way while still doing her job. That's when she made her mistake. She paused for just a second, her eyes lingering on the piano. She wasn't thinking about anything in particular, just looking at the instrument that had brought her so much peace during those late-night sessions when the house slept. But that 1 second was enough. "Oh my God, look," a voice said from Rosa's left. It was the influencer in the red dress, the one who'd been filming everything. She'd noticed Rosa staring at the piano, and apparently that was hilarious. Even the maid thinks she could do better. Her laugh was sharp and cutting. Her friend joined in, and then the people around them turned to look. Within seconds, Rosa felt the weight of dozens of eyes on her. Heat flooded her cheeks. "Maybe we should ask the help," another woman chimed in, her voice dripping with amusement. "Perhaps she learned piano between scrubbing our toilets." More laughter now, spreading through the crowd like a virus. Rosa wanted to disappear, to sink into the floor she'd polished so carefully. She clutched her tray tighter, knuckles white. A man in a tuxedo actually pointed at her. He pointed like she was something in a zoo exhibit. "This is perfect. We can't get a real pianist, so why not get a maid? At least that would be entertaining." The laughter grew louder. Some people looked uncomfortable, averting their eyes, but they didn't speak up. They let it happen. Rosa had learned that silence was just another form of agreement. I mean, can you imagine? The influencer continued, her phone still recording, probably capturing Rosa's humiliation for her millions of followers to see. That would be the ultimate plot twist. The maid saves the day, like something out of a bad movie. "Except this isn't a movie," someone else added. "In real life, people have their place. And her place is collecting our dishes, not performing for us." The words hit Rosa like physical blows. She'd experienced subtle racism and classism before, the way people's eyes would skip over her, the way they'd speak more slowly as if she couldn't understand English properly, the way they'd hand her their coats without saying please or thank you. But this was different. This was open mockery, cruel and deliberate. She wanted to run. Every instinct screamed at her to put down the tray and leave, to go anywhere but here. But she couldn't. She needed this job. Her family needed this job. Her daughter's school fees were due next month. Her father's medication cost more every year. Running away would mean losing everything. So she stood there and took it, her eyes fixed on the tray in her hands, trying to breathe normally while her heart hammered against her ribs. "Oh, come on. We're just having fun," the influencer said when she noticed some disapproving looks from other guests. "Don't be so sensitive." That's what they always said, wasn't it? When they were cruel, when they degraded someone, it was just having fun. The responsibility for feeling hurt somehow became Rosa's fault for being too sensitive. Mr. Winterfield was watching the scene unfold, but he didn't intervene. Maybe he was too stressed about saving the event. Maybe he didn't think it was important enough to address. Or maybe, Rosa thought bitterly, he agreed with them. Maybe to him, she really was just the help. Someone who existed to serve and then become invisible again. The laughter was dying down now, people returning to their conversations, the joke already old, but Rosa could still feel their eyes on her, could still hear the echo of their words. She forced herself to move, to continue collecting dishes, to do her job like nothing had happened. But something had happened. Something had shifted inside her. The humiliation was still there, hot and sharp, but underneath it something else was building. Anger, maybe, or determination. She wasn't sure which. She thought about her grandmother, who had been a respected musician in Manila before the war had taken everything from their family. Her grandmother had taught Rosa to play on an old upright piano that was missing several keys. "Music doesn't care about money," she used to say. "It doesn't care what you wear or where you live. It only cares whether you feel it in here." She'd tap Rosa's chest right over her heart. Rosa had felt it. She'd been good, really good. Good enough that her teachers had talked about scholarships to music schools, about a future on stage. But then life had happened. Her father got sick. Her family needed money. Dreams got packed away with other childhood things that didn't survive into adulthood. She glanced back at the piano one more time. No one else had volunteered to play. The guests were starting to leave in larger numbers now, writing off the evening as a disappointment. Mr. Winterfield looked defeated, barely able to hold his composure. Rosa knew she could play better than anyone who'd tried tonight. She knew it in her bones, but what would be the point? They'd already made it clear what they thought of her. Even if she played perfectly, they'd probably find some way to diminish it, to explain it away, to make sure she stayed in her proper place. That's what hurt the most, she realized. Not the mockery itself, but the certainty that even her best wouldn't be good enough in their eyes, because it wasn't about talent or skill. It was about who she was, where she came from, what she looked like. She was just the maid. And in their world, maids didn't become pianists, no matter how well they could play. The influencer was leaving now, still filming, narrating the disaster of an evening for her followers. As she passed Rosa, she didn't even glance her way. Why would she? Rosa wasn't a person to her. She was just part of the scenery, like the chandeliers or the flowers. Rosa collected the last of the dessert plates and headed toward the kitchen, her head high even though she wanted to cry. She wouldn't give them the satisfaction of seeing her break. That much pride at least she could keep. But as she pushed through the kitchen door, she heard one more voice from the ballroom. This one was different. This one made her stop and listen. "Actually," the voice said, clear and firm, "Rosa does play piano." Rosa's heart stopped. She turned around slowly, hardly daring to believe what she'd heard. It was Isabella, Mr. Winterfield's daughter, standing in the middle of the ballroom with her arms crossed and an expression on her face that Rosa had never seen before. Isabella looked angry. "I've heard her," Isabella continued, louder now, making sure everyone could hear. "She practices in the conservatory during her breaks, and she's really good." The chandeliers sparkled like 1,000 tiny stars above the ballroom. Every light seemed to reflect off something expensive. The crystal glasses, the diamond necklaces, the polished marble floors that had taken Rosa 3 hours to clean that morning. She could see her own reflection in those floors as she moved quietly between the guests, picking up empty champagne glasses and replacing them with full ones. Tonight was the biggest night of the year at the Winterfield estate. The annual charity gala. Rosa had worked here for 3 years,